The Sahara stretches across the northern half of Africa, a sea of sand so vast that from orbit it dominates the continent like a golden scar. It is the largest hot desert on Earth, spreading over 9 million square kilometers, larger than the United States, nearly the size of China, and dwarfing Europe. To stand at its edge is to stare into immensity, where the horizon wavers in heat and dunes rise like waves of a silent ocean. The ground is bare, the air dry, and life clings only where oases or scattered shrubs permit survival. This is the image most of the world holds of the Sahara, a barren realm that feels eternal, as though it has always been this way, as though it has always been sand and stone. Yet the truth is stranger, more dramatic, and infinitely more revealing than the surface suggests. Beneath the dunes lies a hidden history, one that tells us the Sahara has not always been a desert, and that within its sands lie the remains of rivers, lakes, animals, and people who thrived long before the desert we know was born. For centuries, explorers described it as a void where nothing could exist, where caravans marched for weeks without water, where the wind sculpted dunes into fortresses only to erase them again, and where death lingered with every step. Poets called it the realm of emptiness, traders the barrier of fire, scientists the harshest climate outside the polar ice. But this perception conceals a deeper reality. The Sahara is not a timeless wasteland. It is a landscape in flux, one that has shifted dramatically with the turning of Earth's climate, one that has alternated between fertility and desolation in cycles that span thousands of years. To grasp this, imagine standing in the heart of the Tenere Desert, one of the most remote regions of Niger. All around, dunes extend farther than the eye can follow, broken only by the occasional rocky outcrop. It seems inconceivable that life could ever have flourished here. Yet, if you were to dig deep beneath the sand, you might uncover the skeleton of a fish, the bones of a crocodile, or even the remains of humans buried with jewelry and tools. These are not anomalies. They are fragments of a world that existed before the Sahara became arid. Fossils of hippos, elephants, and giraffes have been discovered where today only sand and stone endure. Beneath your feet are ancient riverbeds mapped by satellites, channels that once carried water across hundreds of kilometers. What appears empty is in truth full of memory. The desert that we see today is the latest chapter in a story that reaches back 12,000 years. At that time, as the last ice age ended, Earth's orbit shifted in subtle but profound ways. The tilt of our planet and the wobble of its axis altered the rhythm of monsoons, and suddenly North Africa was drenched with rainfall. Grasslands spread, rivers filled, lakes the size of small seas formed, and the Sahara became green. For thousands of years, it was not an ocean of sand but a savanna. The desert, as we know it, was buried under vegetation, alive with animals, and peopled by communities who hunted, fished, and later herded cattle. What lies hidden now beneath sand is the evidence of that green world. To describe the Sahara as empty is therefore misleading. Its emptiness is an illusion, a thin layer of dryness masking a depth of stories. Sand is a deceiver. It erases, it buries, and it convinces us of permanence. But permanence is not what the Sahara offers. It offers transformation. This desert is a place where time itself shifts, where each dune may have once been the shore of a lake, where each barren plateau may have once echoed with the calls of hippos or the voices of children. The Sahara hides its past well, but science has begun to unearth it. The tools of modern research have given us vision beyond the surface. Satellites orbiting high above detect faint signatures of ancient rivers invisible to human eyes. Radar penetrates sand and reveals channels carved by flowing water. Archaeologists uncover burial grounds where ancient peoples rested their dead with care, evidence that communities thrived here for generations. Rock art carved and painted on cliffs shows cattle, elephants, and swimmers, scenes utterly impossible in today's environment. Piece by piece, the illusion of emptiness crumbles, and the Sahara is revealed as a place of profound history. But one must ask, if the Sahara was once green, how did it become the desert we see today? What happened to its rivers and lakes, its animals and peoples? The answer lies in cycles of climate, in orbital shifts that gradually turned rains away, in the relentless creep of dryness that advanced until life could no longer resist. What remains are the sands that cloak the land, burying what came before. This is the mystery that drives scientists, historians, and dreamers alike. The Sahara is not simply a barrier of heat between the Mediterranean and the Sahel. It is a vault, a crypt that has sealed away evidence of entire worlds. To look upon its dunes is to stand above forgotten rivers, above cities erased, above cultures whose memory now rests in silence. And as we begin to probe these secrets, we find that what lies beneath has implications not only for Africa, but for the entire story of humanity. 12,000 years ago, this land was alive. The question is no longer whether the Sahara was green, but what exactly was buried beneath its sands, and why rediscovering it matters so deeply to us today. And to answer that question, we must step back into the time when the illusion of emptiness first began to unravel, when the Sahara was not desert but paradise, when rivers crossed its plains and lakes, spread wider than modern seas. That is where our journey must begin. The story of the Sahara cannot be told by looking at the surface alone, for the surface lies. Sand dunes shift with every gust of wind, remaking themselves in days or weeks, erasing tracks, hiding stones, burying any trace of what was once alive. What appears timeless is in fact the most unstable of landscapes. In 1 century, the desert's winds can move mountains of sand, covering valleys, swallowing plateaus, and revealing others. The dunes march, slowly but relentlessly, and with them, the illusion of emptiness deepens. Yet beneath the moving skin of the desert is a skeleton of permanence, a record of rivers, lakes, and civilizations waiting to be read. To travel into the Sahara is to step into a world where what you see is never the whole truth. Imagine standing at the Refuge Plateau in Mauritania, often called the Eye of the Sahara. From the ground, it is a series of rocky ridges spiraling outward, strange and imposing. But from the sky, it looks like a massive bullseye carved into the desert. For centuries, its appearance inspired myths, even claims that it was the lost city of Atlantis. But geologists discovered it is a natural formation, a dome of ancient rock eroded into concentric rings by millions of years of weathering. Even here, where legend clouds reality, science pulls us back to truth. The Eye of the Sahara is not Atlantis, but it is a reminder that under the desert are mysteries formed over deep time, some natural, some human, and all concealed beneath layers of sand and story. It is this interplay of illusion and revelation that makes the Sahara both terrifying and captivating. For millennia, traders attempted to cross it with caravans of camels carrying salt, gold, and ivory. They described it as a place of silence and mirages. Mirages are perhaps the perfect symbol of this land, for they embody deception made visible. A pool of water shimmers on the horizon, vanishing as you approach, a trick of light created by layers of hot and cooler air. But not all visions in the Sahara are illusions. Some pools were real, lakes that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, though now they exist only in memory and fossilized shorelines. Beneath the sands of Chad lies evidence of one of the largest lakes ever to exist, called Mega Chad, a body of water larger than modern-day Caspian Sea. When it was full, it stretched so far that it would have been visible from orbit as a massive inland sea. Its fish, its crocodiles, and its shores supported entire communities of humans who left tools and pottery now buried under dust. The existence of such lakes and rivers may seem impossible when you stand today in the heat, but science has confirmed them beyond doubt. Radar scans conducted by space shuttles in the 1990s revealed hidden riverbeds across the desert, channels long dried, yet still imprinted in the earth. These ghost rivers once connected to the Nile, carrying water and perhaps even guiding early humans on their migrations. The Sahara, it seems, was once a network of waterways as complex as any modern system, nourishing grasslands and supporting herds of animals. The desert we see today is a reversal, an inversion of a past that was fertile. This truth forces us to reconsider the word desert. A desert is defined by scarcity of rain, by aridity, by life forced to adapt to extremes. But the Sahara is not a static desert. It is a shifting stage on which climate cycles play their drama. Every 20,000 years or so, the wobble of Earth's axis changes the rhythm of the monsoon rains. When the tilt is favorable, rains drench the Sahara, transforming it into savanna. When the tilt shifts back, dryness creeps in, the rains retreat, lakes evaporate, and the sand wins again. The Sahara is alive with cycles, and what we call permanent is only temporary. The emptiness we see today is only one phase, not the whole. In this lies a deeper lesson about time. Human lives are short compared to the cycles of the planet. To us, the Sahara feels eternal, for it has been desert since the dawn of recorded history. The earliest Egyptian scribes, the Greek travelers, the Roman explorers, all saw it as a desert. But 12,000 years ago is only the blink of an eye in geological time. To Earth, the Sahara has been green as often as it has been dry. Its true story is not one of permanence, but of transformation, of flux, of alternating abundance and desolation. This is why scientists call the Sahara a crypt, a place that entombs its history until technology and persistence pry it open. Beneath the dunes of Niger, archaeologists uncovered the site of Gobero, a Stone Age cemetery that lay hidden for thousands of years. Skeletons of men, women, and children rested there, some buried with ornaments and weapons, some posed in what appear to be rituals of care. One burial contained a woman and 2 children, their hands intertwined as though frozen in eternal embrace. These people lived and died in a Sahara that was green, by lakeside villages where fish were caught, where hippos basked, where grass grew tall. Today, that same site is nothing but sand and silence. The illusion of emptiness dissolves when we face such evidence. Each fossil, each shard of pottery, each carving on stone is a voice from the green Sahara, whispering through time. The dunes may try to bury them, but science brings them back, and with them the revelation that the Sahara is not a barren void, but a buried archive. And the more we uncover, the clearer it becomes that this archive holds answers not just to the past of Africa, but to the very origins of human civilization. What then was buried beneath the Sahara 12,000 years ago? Rivers, lakes, animals, humans, entire ecosystems that rival the richness of any savanna on Earth. But not only nature, also culture. For where there is water, there is life, and where there is life, there is memory. That memory remains, waiting under the sands, waiting for us to listen. To stand at the edge of the Sahara is to feel both awe and unease. It stretches so far that the horizon bends into invisibility, and its silence is so complete that your own breath becomes the loudest sound. Yet what lies beneath that silence is louder than any storm, for it tells of a time when this desert was alive. The Green Sahara was not legend or myth, but a documented reality. Evidence is etched into the cliffs of Tassili en Adjer in Algeria, where thousands of rock paintings depict elephants, cattle, and even swimmers moving through water. These images are not imagination. They are testimonies. They were painted by hands that lived in a world of rivers and grasslands. When you look upon them today, surrounded by nothing but sand, you are struck by the dissonance. It is as though the desert itself were taunting us with proof that it was not always so empty. The transformation from green to desert did not happen overnight. It was a slow death, a long retreat of rain. Around 5,000 years ago, the monsoon rains began to fade. Year by year, lakes shrank, rivers weakened, and vegetation thinned. Humans who had built their lives around water were forced to adapt. Some became nomadic, following what little grass remained for their cattle. Others left altogether, migrating toward the Nile Valley, where the river still flowed steadily. In this way, the death of the Sahara may have given birth to one of the greatest civilizations in history, ancient Egypt. The Nile became the refuge of peoples displaced by drying lands, and from their union arose agriculture, writing, and monuments that endure even today. The desert may seem lifeless, but it has shaped human destiny in ways both hidden and profound. This brings us to the true paradox of the Sahara. It is both destroyer and preserver. It destroyed ecosystems, erased rivers, and ended cultures. But by burying them under sand, it also preserved them. Fossils of fish remain sealed away in what are now dunes. Human skeletons lie intact in cemeteries untouched for millennia, Pottery, tools, and ornaments rest in the silence, protected by the very aridity that denied life. In this sense, the Sahara is like a library sealed by sand, its books locked away, waiting for curious minds to read them again. And as technology advances, we open more of its volumes. Remote sensing from orbit, ground-penetrating radar, chemical analysis of ancient bones, all these tools turn the Sahara from a silent desert into a storybook of deep time. The illusion of emptiness, therefore, collapses entirely. The Sahara is not empty. It is full. It is full of rivers that no longer flow, lakes that no longer shine, animals that no longer roam, and peoples whose voices we still strain to hear. It is a place of memory written in sand, a reminder that our planet is not fixed but ever-changing. What seems eternal is often fleeting. The dunes we see today are only a mask, a temporary veil over landscapes that will one day return when cycles shift again. For it is almost certain that in thousands of years, the rains will come back, the Sahara will bloom again, and future generations will walk through savannas where we now see only dunes. And so we must ask, what is buried beneath the Sahara 12,000 years ago? The answer is not a single thing, but an entire world. A world of rivers and lakes, of hippos and crocodiles, of hunters and herders, of art and memory. A world erased by dryness, but preserved in fragments beneath the sands. To uncover that world is not merely to satisfy curiosity, it is to understand how humans adapt, how civilizations rise and fall, and how climate shapes destiny. It is to confront the truth that our environment is fragile, that abundance can turn to desolation, and that survival requires wisdom as well as resilience. The Sahara teaches us that deserts are not eternal, that emptiness is an illusion, and that beneath silence lies history. To walk upon its dunes is to tread above forgotten rivers and lost peoples, to step on the skin of a land that once lived and may live again. This is why the Sahara is not only a desert but also a mirror. It reflects our own impermanence, our vulnerability to forces larger than ourselves, and our constant search for meaning in the shifting sands of time. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was not barren, it was green, it was alive. And its secret is this: what we call emptiness is never truly empty. Beneath the dunes, beneath the silence, the desert remembers. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was not the golden sea of sand that we know today. It was a land of water and grass, a place of abundance that stretched across nearly 1/3 of Africa. The story of this transformation is written into the bones of the earth itself, into fossils of crocodiles buried beneath dunes, into carvings of elephants and cattle on ancient stone walls, and into the memories of lakes so vast that they rivaled inland seas. Scientists call this chapter of history the African humid period, and it reveals the Sahara not as an eternal desert, but as a landscape that once bloomed with life. As the last ice age ended, the planet's climate entered a period of dramatic change. Glaciers retreated, seas rose, and rainfall patterns shifted across the globe. In North Africa, the tilt and wobble of Earth's orbit altered the path of monsoon winds, where for millennia there had been dryness, clouds gathered, storms built, and rain fell in torrents. Within only a few centuries, the Sahara changed from barren desert into savanna. Rainfall filled basins, creating massive lakes that spread for hundreds of kilometers. Grasses sprouted across plains, acacia trees rooted, and wildlife surged back into regions that had been lifeless for ages. The most extraordinary of these lakes was Mega Chad, a body of water so immense that it covered more than 360,000 square kilometers at its peak, making it larger than today's Caspian Sea. To stand on its shores would have been to look across a horizon of blue stretching farther than the eye could follow, waves crashing against beaches where now only sand exists. Its waters teemed with fish, crocodiles, and hippos. Herds of giraffes and elephants grazed the surrounding savannas. Humans gathered at its shores, leaving behind tools, pottery, and even bones of meals that speak to lives sustained by its bounty. Mega Chad was not alone. Other lakes dotted the Sahara, each fed by rivers that flowed with vigor, each sustaining its own ecosystem of animals and people. This green Sahara was not simply a scattering of lakes, it was an interconnected web of rivers and floodplains. Rain fell in abundance, carving channels that joined into streams, streams that merged into rivers, rivers that swelled into lakes. From Mauritania in the west to Sudan in the east, water flowed across regions that today are parched. The desert as we know it was buried under a living network of waterways. Even the Nile, lifeblood of Egypt, was fed by tributaries that once crossed the Sahara, rivers now invisible, but revealed by satellite as ghost channels beneath the sand. Life responded with exuberance. Fossils show hippos wallowing in mud where dunes now stretch. Crocodiles glided through rivers that no longer exist. Antelope, gazelle, giraffes, and elephants roamed in herds, their paths worn into trails that can still be traced in eroded stone. Birds followed migratory routes across the green expanse, their presence etched into bones found at archaeological sites. The Sahara was not merely green, it was alive in a way that seems almost impossible to imagine today. Humans flourished as well. The earliest communities hunted the animals that thrived here, fishing in rivers and lakes, gathering plants that grew in abundance. Later, they began to herd cattle, becoming among the earliest pastoralists in the world. They built villages along the water's edge, leaving cemeteries where the dead were buried with care, often adorned with jewelry or accompanied by tools. One site, Gobero in Niger, reveals burials of entire families who lived and died in a land that was fertile. Archaeologists uncovered skeletons of children holding hands with their mother, as though frozen in a moment of tenderness across millennia. Such scenes remind us that the Sahara was not just green but human, a place where communities lived, loved, and remembered. This flourishing of life raises questions. How could such abundance exist in a place that is now so hostile? How could rivers have once crossed lands that today receive barely a few centimeters of rainfall in a year? The answer lies in the cycles of climate, cycles tied to the movement of Earth itself. Our planet does not orbit the Sun in a fixed pattern. Its axis tilts, its orbit stretches and contracts, and these shifts alter the distribution of sunlight across the globe. Known as Milankovitch cycles, these patterns drive the advance and retreat of ice ages, the spread of deserts, and the greening of savannas. In the Sahara, such a cycle brought monsoon rains northward, flooding the land with life for several thousand years. For people living then, the green Sahara must have seemed eternal, a paradise destined to endure. Generations hunted and fished, raised families, carved art into stone. They could not have known that their world was temporary, that the very cycles that had given them abundance would one day take it away. Yet for a time, life thrived in this unlikely Eden, leaving behind echoes that still whisper from beneath the sand. The African humid period was a miracle of water, but also a stage on which humanity took important steps forward. Communities became larger, more permanent. People experimented with new ways of living, shifting from nomadic hunting to settled herding. They painted scenes of their lives on canyon walls, capturing moments of swimming, of tending cattle, of animals long vanished from the Sahara. These paintings are more than art. They are memory, evidence that the Sahara was green, that it was filled with rivers, animals, and people who thrived in its bounty. The desert we know today is an illusion layered over this reality, and to uncover it, we must read the fossils, the carvings, the bones, and the very soil itself. They tell us that the Sahara was once fertile, that its greenness was vast, and that its memory endures even in dryness. The Sahara was alive. And as we follow this story deeper, we will discover that humans did not simply live in the green Sahara. They left footprints in its mud that would shape the destiny of civilizations to come. To picture the green Sahara, one must set aside the image of golden dunes and imagine instead a land where rains fell each season, where rivers cut through valleys, and where grassland stretched farther than the horizon. It was not unlike the savannas of modern Kenya or Tanzania, filled with herds of wildlife and dotted with clusters of trees that offered shade to both animals and humans. The desert was not a desert at all, but a corridor of life, a place where species flourished and where people carved out new ways of living. The evidence of this transformation is not speculation. It is carved into stone, preserved in fossils, and visible from space. In Algeria, the vast plateau of Tassili en Adjer is covered with thousands of rock paintings that date back to the African humid period. They depict cattle grazing, people swimming, elephants marching across plains, and hunters chasing antelope. These images are precise and detailed, not symbolic. They show the world as it was, a world of abundance. When viewed today, surrounded by barren cliffs and empty valleys, they strike the imagination with almost painful force. How could such life have once thrived where now only silence remains? Yet the answer is clear. Rain had transformed the Sahara into a living savanna, and humans celebrated it in art. The lakes of this era were more than bodies of water. They were engines of culture. Mega Chad, immense and fertile, sustained some of the earliest fishing communities. People built boats from reeds, cast nets, and harvested fish in such numbers that their bones still litter ancient campsites. The Nile swelled with tributaries that are now invisible, channels that once ran across what is today desert, feeding settlements along its banks. Even the central Sahara contained wetlands and marshes, where herds of cattle grazed, and humans left behind pottery decorated with images of animals and plants. These were not isolated groups eking out survival. They were thriving communities linked by water, trading, sharing, and adapting to a world of plenty. The diversity of life was astonishing. Fossils uncovered in Niger reveal crocodiles that grew longer than 8 meters, creatures that dominated rivers where hippos and fish also thrived. The remains of giraffes have been found far from their modern ranges, suggesting that herds roamed freely across the Green Sahara. Lions, leopards, and cheetahs hunted these plains, their presence recorded both in fossil remains and in rock art. Even birds such as ostriches and pelicans appear in paintings, reminders that wetlands and savannas once supported them. Every layer of evidence confirms the same truth. The Sahara was green, alive, and filled with a complexity of life that rivals modern ecosystems. Humans, too, adapted in remarkable ways. Archaeological sites reveal a progression from hunting and gathering to herding and fishing. At Gobaro, the Stone Age cemetery in Niger, 2 distinct cultures have been identified. The earlier one lived primarily by hunting and fishing, leaving behind harpoons and bones of fish. Later, a pastoral culture emerged, burying their dead with ornaments and pottery, signs of a more settled way of life. These shifts reflect broader patterns across the Green Sahara, where people learned to domesticate cattle and perhaps even cultivate plants, laying early foundations for the pastoral and agricultural societies that would spread across Africa. The African humid period was not merely a time of survival, it was a time of innovation. Communities experimented with pottery, creating vessels to store water and food. They painted their experiences on stone walls, producing some of the oldest known artistic traditions in the world. They formed cemeteries, evidence of social and ritual practices that extended beyond immediate survival. Such developments reveal that the Green Sahara was not only a landscape of natural abundance, but also a cradle of cultural complexity. To modern eyes, it is tempting to think of deserts as permanent, and to see Green Saharas as anomalies. But climate science teaches us the opposite. Deserts bloom and die in rhythm with Earth's cycles. The African humid period was one of many times when rains transformed North Africa. Similar periods occurred in earlier epochs, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Each time, human ancestors or relatives may have taken advantage of the fertile land, migrating across its plains and rivers, expanding their range, and leaving behind traces of their presence. In this way, the Sahara has been both barrier and bridge, shaping the course of human evolution and history. The abundance of the Green Sahara shaped migration patterns. People moved freely across regions that are now impassable. They exchanged ideas, tools, and traditions. When the rains eventually faded, some groups migrated toward the Nile, carrying with them knowledge of herding and farming. Others spread into the Sahel, influencing cultures that would later rise there. In this sense, the Green Sahara was not simply a paradise lost. It was a corridor of connection, a stage upon which the foundations of later civilizations were laid. When we look back at the African humid period, we see more than lakes and rivers. We see humans experimenting with permanence, with art, with ritual, with ways of life that hint at the beginnings of complexity. We see ecosystems teeming with life, rivaling the Serengeti of today. and we see the seeds of migrations that would one day influence Egypt and beyond. The Sahara was green, and in its greenness it gave humanity both sustenance and direction. Yet the paradise of the green Sahara was not destined to last. The cycles that had brought the rains would one day shift again, and with them the slow death of lakes, rivers, and grasslands would begin. Communities would face choices of adaptation or departure. Animals would dwindle, lakes would shrink, and deserts would return. But before that end came, the green Sahara left behind its greatest legacy, one that still whispers through fossils, paintings, and bones. It left a memory of abundance, a reminder that deserts hide histories, and that what seems empty is often the shell of a once-living world. The green Sahara was a place of astonishing beauty, but it was also fragile. Its existence depended on the rains, and the rains depended on the rhythms of Earth's orbit. The people and animals who lived there could not have known that their paradise was temporary. To them, the rivers must have seemed eternal, the lakes boundless, the grasslands endless. But over centuries, the signs of change began to appear. The monsoons weakened, the rains came later and ended sooner, the rivers shrank, and lakes retreated from their shores. At first, these shifts were subtle, perhaps imperceptible across a single human lifetime. But generation by generation, the landscape grew drier. Communities that had thrived by fishing and herding were forced to adapt. Some became nomadic, moving with the seasons to find the last patches of water and grass. Others sought refuge in more permanent rivers like the Nile, where abundance persisted even as the Sahara dried. Fossil evidence suggests that many species also began to retreat southward, following water into the Sahel and beyond. Crocodiles and hippos, once common in the Sahara, disappeared as lakes evaporated. Herds of giraffes and elephants dwindled. Predators such as lions and cheetahs lost their hunting grounds. The green Sahara began to unravel, and with it, the cultures that had flourished in its embrace. Yet even as the landscape faded, it left behind traces that endure to this day. The paintings on canyon walls remain as vivid reminders of what once was. In Tassili en Adjir, the so-called round-head figures depict humans with large, rounded features swimming or performing rituals. Other images show cattle herding, hunting scenes, and animals that no longer inhabit the Sahara. These paintings span thousands of years, chronicling not only abundance but also the transition to dryness. They are not only art but also history, recording the story of a land in transformation. The cemeteries too tell a story of change. At Gobero, archaeologists uncovered burials from two distinct periods. The earlier culture lived when lakes were full and resources abundant. The later culture existed in a time of retreating waters, when survival required new strategies. The graves of the later period reveal a different way of life, with more evidence of herding and mobility. The contrast between these two periods is stark. It demonstrates how humans responded to environmental shifts, adapting when possible, moving when necessary, and leaving behind evidence of resilience in the face of change. To us today, the green Sahara feels almost mythical, yet it is grounded in hard evidence. Fossils of fish and crocodiles buried under dunes, pollen grains preserved in sediments, chemical signatures in ancient soils, and satellite images of hidden riverbeds all converge on the same conclusion. The Sahara was once a lush savanna. It was not an isolated miracle but part of a broader rhythm of Earth's climate, a rhythm that still continues. The desert we know today will not last forever. In tens of thousands of years, the rains may return again, and the Sahara will bloom once more. This realization forces us to reconsider how we view permanence. Civilizations often believe that their environments are stable, that rivers will always flow, that fields will always yield crops. But the story of the Sahara reveals that landscapes shift, sometimes slowly, sometimes dramatically, and that survival depends on adaptation. The green Sahara reminds us that abundance can vanish, and that those who endure are those who learn to move, to innovate, and to carry knowledge forward. The legacy of the African humid period is immense. It shaped human migration across Africa, influencing the rise of civilizations along the Nile. It gave us some of the earliest art, some of the earliest herding, and some of the most poignant archaeological discoveries of prehistoric life. It preserved fossils that reveal ecosystems as rich as any on Earth. And it offers a lesson in humility, reminding us that what seems permanent is often fleeting, and that climate has the power to transform entire continents. When we ask, what was buried beneath the Sahara 12,000 years ago, the answer for this chapter is clear. Beneath the dunes are rivers that once flowed, lakes that once sparkled, animals that once roamed, and humans who once thrived. The Sahara was not always barren, it was green, abundant, and alive. To uncover this truth is to understand not only the history of a desert, but also the story of humanity itself. The green Sahara is gone, but its memory remains, written in stone, fossil, and sand. And as we move deeper into the story of what lies beneath, we find that rivers are the key. For while the rains made the Sahara bloom, it was the rivers that carried life across its plains, linking communities, sustaining animals, and carving paths that still exist, though hidden. To follow the story of the Sahara, we must now follow the rivers that once crossed it, for they are the veins of the land, and their buried channels still whisper of a world that has not entirely disappeared. Beneath the Sahara lies a ghostly network of rivers, channels that once carried water across thousands of kilometers but that today are hidden under dunes and stone. From the ground, you would never know they exist. The sand gives no hint of them, and the silence of the desert conceals their paths. Yet, with the help of satellites and radar, scientists have pulled back the veil and revealed a buried hydrological system that tells us the Sahara was once threaded with waterways as complex as any on Earth. These rivers were not small streams. They were immense, braided flows that nourished grasslands, fed lakes, and in some cases connected with the Nile itself. To uncover them is to uncover the veins of the green Sahara, the circulatory system that kept life alive in a land we now call barren. The discovery of these hidden rivers began in earnest in the late 20th century, when orbiting satellites equipped with radar instruments scanned the Sahara's surface. Unlike normal cameras, radar can penetrate sand and detect structures beneath. What appeared on those scans astonished researchers. Long, meandering lines snaked across regions that today look flat and lifeless. These lines matched the patterns of ancient riverbeds, carved by flowing water and preserved under dunes. One of the most striking discoveries was the so-called Tamanrasset River, a channel larger than the modern Nile that once flowed across Mauritania, Western Sahara, and into the Atlantic Ocean. If you stood on its banks thousands of years ago, you would have seen a mighty river rushing to the sea, carrying sediments, nourishing plains, and sustaining life across vast distances. Today, nothing remains but sand. The buried rivers do more than reveal that the Sahara was once green. They explain how such abundance was possible. Rainfall alone cannot sustain vast ecosystems. It requires rivers to move water across landscapes, to create floodplains where plants can grow and animals can graze, to feed lakes where fish can thrive. The Sahara's rivers were lifelines, connecting different regions and enabling migration of both animals and humans. Fossils of aquatic creatures such as catfish and crocodiles confirm that these rivers once flowed strongly enough to sustain large populations of freshwater species. Even today, in the deep aquifers beneath the Sahara, there remains water that once filled these rivers, trapped underground as a reminder of wetter times. For humans, these rivers were highways as well as sources of food and water. Archaeological sites reveal stone tools scattered along ancient channels, evidence that early communities followed the water as it shifted, building camps near its banks, hunting animals drawn to it, fishing in its depths. The rivers also provided corridors of migration. When the Sahara was green, it was not an isolated pocket of life, but a connected system. People could move from west to east, from the Atlantic to the Nile, following rivers that linked what are now distant and desolate regions. Some scholars suggest that these river corridors may have played a role in human migrations out of Africa, guiding groups toward the Mediterranean and beyond. The idea that the Sahara once had rivers the size of the Nile challenges our perception of deserts as permanent. We are accustomed to thinking of great rivers as fixed features of the earth, like the Amazon, the Mississippi, or the Yangtze. But the Sahara reminds us that even rivers can vanish, leaving behind only traces visible to the eye of science. The Tamanrasset River, for example, was once so vast that it carved a submarine canyon beneath the Atlantic, a geological scar that still exists and proves that massive volumes of water once poured into the ocean from what is now desert. That canyon is silent testimony to the might of a river that has been gone for thousands of years. To trace these rivers is to reimagine the Sahara entirely. Instead of dunes and silence, picture floodplains stretching across Mauritania, fertile valleys where cattle grazed, boats drifting on wide channels, and fish abundant enough to feed entire communities. Imagine the roar of a river where today only the wind howls. The buried channels are more than geological curiosities. They are windows into a vanished world. They reveal how the Sahara could support not only wildlife but also human culture, and how the desert we see today is only the mask of a fertile land erased by time. The discovery of hidden rivers has also deepened our understanding of how ancient civilizations rose and fell. The Nile, for example, may have been fed by tributaries that no longer exist. Satellite scans reveal channels that once joined the Nile but are now cut off. These tributaries would have increased the river's flow during the African humid period, nourishing Egypt's floodplains long before the pharaohs built their monuments. The drying of these rivers may have contributed to shifts in population, pushing people toward the Nile as other water sources vanished. In this way, the fate of the Sahara's rivers is directly tied to the fate of human societies. The Sahara today hides these rivers well. To the traveler on camelback, crossing dunes that stretch for hundreds of kilometers, there is no sign that water ever flowed here, but the earth remembers. Its scars remain in the subsurface, in sediments carried to the Atlantic, in aquifers that hold ancient water. The buried rivers remind us that what appears empty is full of hidden history, that deserts are not voids but palimpsests, layers upon layers of worlds written and erased by time. The hidden rivers of the Sahara were once the arteries of an immense ecosystem. They shaped the land, carved valleys, and delivered life where it would otherwise have been impossible. Today, they are silent beneath the dunes, but their traces remain undeniable. When scientists first mapped them, they realized that the Sahara was not only a green savanna but also a continent within a continent, a realm whose rivers rivaled the world's greatest waterways. To imagine their disappearance is to confront the fragility of landscapes that feel eternal but are not. One of the most striking features of these buried rivers is how they remain imprinted on the land, even after thousands of years of dryness. The sand above them shifts constantly, yet beneath, the channels endure, carved into bedrock and preserved by layers of sediment. Radar imagery reveals them with stunning clarity, winding lines stretching for hundreds of kilometers, sometimes branching into deltas where they once fed into massive lakes. Some rivers ran northward, emptying into basins that became inland seas. Others coursed eastward, joining the Nile. Still others flowed westward, pouring their waters into the Atlantic. Together, they formed a network that connected the Sahara in ways that the present desert landscape hides completely. These rivers were more than sources of water. They were forces of connection. In a world without paved roads, rivers were the highways along which humans traveled. They provided predictable routes across vast distances, linking communities and enabling trade long before the concept of civilization as we know it. Archaeological evidence suggests that human groups spread across the Sahara in part by following these river corridors. They carried stone tools, pottery traditions, and perhaps even early languages with them. As the rivers shifted with climate cycles, humans shifted with them, migrating, adapting, and leaving behind scattered traces of their journeys. The animals followed these same paths. Herds of elephants and giraffes, predators like lions and cheetahs, even crocodiles and hippos all moved along the floodplains and deltas of the Sahara's ancient rivers. Fossils recovered from beneath dunes confirm this astonishing reality. In places like Mali and Niger, remains of crocodiles have been found far from any modern water source, evidence that these creatures once thrived in rivers now erased. In fact, some crocodile populations in isolated Saharan oases today may be the descendants of those once widespread reptiles, remnants of a vanished world clinging to survival in rare pockets of water. The Tamanrasset River remains the most dramatic example of this hidden network. Flowing westward across what is now Mauritania and Western Sahara, it carried such enormous volumes of water that it carved a canyon under the Atlantic Ocean as deep as the Grand Canyon. This submarine canyon is still visible today, proof beyond doubt that the Sahara's rivers were not small seasonal streams, but mighty waterways of continental scale. That such a river could vanish completely is almost beyond comprehension, yet it demonstrates how climate cycles can erase even the greatest features of a landscape. The canyon tells us that the Sahara's rivers were not illusions but realities, now buried but never fully gone. The connection between these rivers and the Nile is of particular importance. The Nile is one of the most iconic rivers in human history, cradle of ancient Egypt, lifeblood of millions for thousands of years. Yet the Nile itself may owe part of its history to rivers that no longer exist. During the African humid period, tributaries from the Sahara joined the Nile, swelling its waters and feeding its floodplains. When these tributaries dried, populations that had once lived along them migrated toward the Nile Valley, concentrating there and contributing to the rise of Egyptian civilization. In this way, the hidden rivers of the Sahara may have shaped the destiny of one of the world's greatest cultures. It is a haunting thought that under the desert's silence lies the memory of such abundance. Travelers crossing dunes today find only emptiness. The sand shifts endlessly, the heat presses down, and the horizon offers nothing but more barrenness. Yet if one could peel away the dunes, the story of rivers would be revealed channels where fish once swam, where hippos basked, where children played along muddy banks, where hunters stalked animals drawn to the water. The Sahara hides its past so completely that without science we might never have known it. But the earth keeps records, written in sediments, carved in stone, and preserved in the shape of the land. For humanity, the lesson is clear. Rivers are lifelines, but they are also vulnerable. When the climate shifts, they can vanish, and with them entire ways of life. The people of the Green Sahara depended on these waterways as surely as we depend on our modern rivers today. When the rivers died, they had to move, adapt, or perish. Their migrations altered the course of history, showing how intimately human destiny is tied to the environment. We often imagine civilizations as products of human ingenuity alone, but the Sahara's rivers remind us that geography and climate are partners in the story of culture. The buried rivers also inspire awe because they remind us of Earth's capacity for change. If such vast rivers could disappear in only a few thousand years, what else might transform in the future? The Sahara is not unique in its cycles. Other deserts have bloomed and withered in rhythm with planetary shifts, but the Sahara's rivers stand as some of the most powerful examples of nature's ability to erase its own creations. They are ghost rivers, gone yet not gone, their presence marked only in hidden scars that science has revealed. As we follow the channels of these lost rivers, we begin to see the Sahara not as a desert, but as a layered archive. The rivers tell of water, of life, of abundance. Their disappearance tells of dryness, migration, and survival. They are both memory and warning, both past and future. And as we continue to explore their secrets, we are drawn inevitably to the human story, the way these rivers nurtured communities, the way their death forced change, and the way their memory remains in bones, in tools, and in art left behind in the desert. The silence of the Sahara today makes it difficult to imagine the soundscape of its rivers. Picture, if you can, standing on the banks of a channel that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, the water glistening under the African sun, the air alive with the calls of birds, the rustle of animals in the grass, the laughter of children at play. Now replace that with the present reality, dunes rising and falling in endless waves, the wind whispering across sand, the absence of any sound but your own breath. The contrast is staggering. And yet both realities belong to the same place, separated only by time. The memory of these rivers is not confined to scientific instruments or fossils. It is preserved in human imagination as well. Across North Africa, myths and oral traditions speak of lost rivers, of lands that were once fertile but became desert, of waters that retreated and left silence behind. These stories, passed down through generations, may be fragments of cultural memory, faint echoes of the time when rivers truly did flow across the Sahara. Science confirms what memory suspected, that the desert hides not only sand, but also the remnants of a green world. The rivers also remind us of the paradox of deserts. On the surface, deserts appear to erase life. They swallow valleys, bury ruins, and silence ecosystems. Yet in erasing, they also preserve. The very aridity that kills plants and animals also protects fossils, bones, and artifacts from decay. The dried riverbeds, locked beneath dunes, remain remarkably intact. This preservation has allowed scientists to reconstruct a picture of the Sahara's past with surprising clarity. It is as though the desert, in taking life away, also kept its story safe for us to rediscover. Archaeological discoveries along these ancient channels demonstrate the role rivers played in human culture. Stone tools are scattered where water once flowed, their edges sharp despite thousands of years beneath sand. Pottery fragments lie buried in sediments that were once riverbanks. Even burial grounds appear near these channels, suggesting that people chose to place their dead near water, perhaps believing the rivers carried souls as well as fish. These traces show us that the Sahara's rivers were not simply physical features, but also cultural symbols woven into the lives and beliefs of the people who depended on them. The death of these rivers was slow but relentless. As the African humid period drew to an end around 5,000 years ago, monsoon rains weakened. Floods that once filled channels dwindled, leaving behind muddy trickles. Lakes shrank, their shorelines retreating year by year. Grasslands thinned, herds migrated, and predators followed. Humans, faced with dwindling water, were forced to abandon river valleys that had sustained them for generations. Some moved into the Nile Valley, others into the Sahel, carrying with them traditions, technologies, and memories of rivers that would never return. The desert advanced, and the rivers disappeared beneath sand, preserved as ghost lines for future eyes to rediscover. The role of these migrations in human history cannot be overstated. The Nile Valley, which became one of the greatest cradles of civilization, may owe part of its population and culture to the drying of the Sahara. Communities displaced by the death of rivers brought with them knowledge of herding, pottery, and perhaps even early forms of agriculture. The rise of ancient Egypt, with its monumental architecture and enduring culture, may therefore be seen as one of the great legacies of the Sahara's lost rivers. The drying that ended one world gave rise to another. The story of the Sahara's rivers is also a lesson for the future. Our climate today is changing at a pace visible within a single human lifetime. The Sahara shows us what such changes can mean. Vast rivers can vanish. Entire ecosystems can be erased. Human societies can be uprooted and forced to migrate, but it also shows us resilience. Life adapts, moves, and survives. The desert's silence hides a history of both collapse and endurance, reminding us that change is not the exception but the rule. To walk across the Sahara now is to tread above the bones of rivers. Beneath your feet lie channels that once roared with water, now filled with silence. Yet the memory of those rivers lingers in stone, in fossil, in myth, in the scars of the land itself. They tell us that the Sahara is not what it seems, that its emptiness is only a mask, that beneath the desert lies a world, erased but not forgotten. And so, when we ask what was buried beneath the Sahara 12,000 years ago, the rivers are among the clearest answers. They were lifelines, connecting lakes, feeding ecosystems, sustaining humans, and shaping history. Their disappearance marked the end of one age and the beginning of another. Their memory, revealed by science and preserved by desert silence, continues to speak across millennia. The Sahara's rivers may be gone, but their story endures. It is a story of abundance and loss, of memory and transformation, of the intimate bond between water and life. And as we follow this story deeper, we turn now from rivers to the people who live beside them, to the communities who built their lives along their banks and left behind cities and cemeteries now hidden under the dunes. Beneath the sand of the Sahara lie not only rivers and fossils, but also the remains of human lives, entire communities that once thrived in a land of water and grass. When the desert advanced, it buried them so completely that for thousands of years no one knew they existed. Only in the last century have archaeologists begun to uncover the silent witnesses of those forgotten peoples. Cemeteries, tools, ornaments, and signs of ritual that tell us this desert was once a cradle of culture. These discoveries reveal not only that humans lived in the Green Sahara, but that they built societies of surprising richness, societies whose memory remained hidden until wind and science exposed them once again. One of the most haunting sites lies in the Tenere Desert of Niger, a place so desolate today that caravans cross it with dread. Here, beneath dunes that stretch for hundreds of kilometers, archaeologists discovered a cemetery that had lain untouched for millennia. Known as Gobero, it was first uncovered in the 1990s when a scientist studying fossils stumbled upon human bones protruding from sand. Excavations revealed more than 200 burials, each telling a fragment of the story of people who once lived beside a lake that no longer exists. These burials were not haphazard. They were deliberate, with bodies carefully arranged, adorned with jewelry, surrounded by tools, and sometimes buried together in ways that speak of love and ritual. One grave contained the skeleton of a woman with 2 children, their hands intertwined as if frozen in eternal embrace. Another revealed a man buried with a necklace of delicate shells, evidence of trade or travel to distant coasts. Some burials showed signs of offerings, such as pottery or stone tools placed near the dead. These details reveal that the people of Gobero were not merely surviving in the Green Sahara. They were living with meaning, with customs, with beliefs about life and death. They built a culture in the midst of abundance, one that persisted through centuries and adapted as the climate shifted. Gobero is not the only site that speaks to this hidden world. Across the Sahara, from Mali to Sudan, archaeologists have found stone tools, pottery, and remnants of settlements buried beneath layers of sand. In some places, rock shelters contain paintings of cattle and humans, evidence of herding communities who lived in harmony with their environment. In others, hearths and fire pits mark the places where families once gathered, where food was cooked, where stories may have been told. Each discovery adds to the picture of a Sahara that was not empty, but alive with human activity. These forgotten peoples were not primitive in the sense of being simple or isolated. They were adaptive, innovative, and connected. The jewelry found in burials at Gobero includes shells that came from hundreds of kilometers away, suggesting networks of exchange that stretched far beyond the immediate region. The pottery discovered at various sites shows intricate designs, some of the earliest known in Africa, indicating both artistry and function. The very act of burying the dead with care demonstrates social bonds, shared rituals, and a sense of continuity across generations. The Sahara of this period was more than a home. It was a stage on which cultures experimented with new ways of living. The abundance of lakes and rivers allowed for fishing communities, while the wide grasslands supported pastoralists who herded cattle. Some groups remained hunters, pursuing gazelle and antelope. Others shifted toward more settled lives, building villages near reliable water sources. This diversity of lifestyles shows how humans adapted flexibly to their environment, taking advantage of the opportunities the Green Sahara provided. The discoveries beneath the dunes remind us that history is fragile. For thousands of years, the people of Gobero and other Saharan cultures were completely forgotten. Their names, their languages, their songs are lost forever. All that remains are bones, tools, and art, fragments from which we piece together their story. And yet, those fragments speak volumes. They tell us that the Sahara was not a void between civilizations, but itself a center of culture. They show us that humans lived, thrived, and died here, leaving behind traces that defy the desert's attempt to erase them. The buried peoples of the Sahara also challenge our assumptions about where culture begins. For a long time, scholars focused on the Nile Valley as the cradle of North African civilization. But the Green Sahara shows us that long before Egypt rose, communities were already experimenting with herding, art, and ritual. These forgotten peoples were not pharaohs building monuments of stone, but they were pioneers in their own way, shaping lives of meaning in a land that now seems impossible to inhabit. Their memory expands the map of human history, reminding us that deserts conceal as much as they reveal. The sands that cover Gobero and other sites act as both destroyer and protector. They erased the surface evidence of human life, making the Sahara appear empty. But they also shielded bones and artifacts from weathering, preserving them for discovery thousands of years later. When archaeologists unearth a skeleton still wearing a necklace of shells, or pottery still decorated with designs. It is as though the desert itself has opened a time capsule, allowing us a glimpse into a world that should have been lost forever. The story of buried cities and forgotten peoples is only beginning to emerge. Each excavation uncovers more evidence that the Sahara was once a vibrant cultural landscape. Each artifact, each bone, each painting is a fragment of memory restored, and together they reveal that beneath the dunes lies not only the story of rivers and lakes, but also the story of humans who lived in their embrace. The discovery of Gobero reshaped our understanding of the Sahara, but it is only one among many windows into the past. Across the desert, other sites confirm that communities thrived where today only sand reigns. In Mali, researchers have uncovered stone settlements perched along what were once riverbanks, their walls built from slabs of rock arranged with deliberate care. In Libya, near the Caucasus Mountains, caves and shelters reveal painted scenes of daily life: hunters with bows, women carrying baskets, herders guiding cattle. These images tell us that the Green Sahara was filled with not just survival, but society, with customs, traditions, and moments of joy that have echoed silently for thousands of years. The story these sites tell is one of transformation. At Gobero, the earliest inhabitants relied on hunting and fishing. They left behind harpoons carved from bone, nets weighted with stones, and piles of fish remains that testify to the bounty of nearby lakes. As centuries passed and the climate began to shift, a new culture emerged, one that herded cattle and lived more nomadic lives, moving with the rhythms of water and grass. Their graves show different ornaments, their pottery reflects different designs, and their tools suggest different strategies for survival. What we see is not a static culture, but an evolving one, adapting to a changing world. These shifts mirror the broader story of humanity during the African humid period. In a world where rivers and lakes spread across the Sahara, people experimented with new ways of life. They learned to tame animals, to manage herds, to use pottery for storage. They began to form larger communities, bound together not just by survival, but by shared customs. They developed rituals for the dead, carving meaning into the landscape and into their lives. This is the essence of culture, human beings shaping the world and being shaped by it in return. The Sahara, far from empty, was a laboratory of human possibility. The art of the Sahara is especially revealing. In Tassili en Adja, rock walls are covered with thousands of paintings and carvings, a gallery that stretches across canyons and cliffs. Some figures are enormous, larger than life, painted in vivid pigments that remain visible despite millennia of exposure. They show humans swimming in rivers, dancing in circles, tending cattle, and hunting wild animals. They show elephants with curved tusks, giraffes striding gracefully, crocodiles gliding through water. The detail is striking, evidence of artists who observed carefully and recorded faithfully. These paintings are not abstractions, they are memories, scenes from life in the Green Sahara. The people who created this art left behind more than images. They left evidence of belief. Some paintings depict ritual scenes, figures arranged in ways that suggest ceremony or worship. Others show human forms with exaggerated features, perhaps representing spirits or ancestors. The round-head figures, with their large, circular heads and enigmatic postures, may symbolize beings of power or myth. Though their precise meaning is lost to us, their very presence speaks of imagination, of attempts to explain the world, of stories and myths carried in the hearts of these forgotten peoples. Burials, too, reveal traces of belief. The care with which bodies were arranged suggests more than practical disposal. Jewelry, tools, and pottery placed with the dead suggest ideas about life after death, about the journey of the soul, about continuity beyond the grave. These rituals bind the Sahara's ancient peoples to the broader human story, for across the world, cultures developed ways to honor their dead and preserve memory. The fact that such practices emerged in the Sahara shows that this land, now barren, was once rich not only in water but in meaning. Trade networks also stretched across the Green Sahara, as evidenced by materials found far from their source. Shells from distant coasts appear in burials deep in the desert, carried hundreds of kilometers through exchange. Stone tools crafted from materials not native to their sites suggest movement and connection. These networks would have linked communities across vast distances, weaving the Sahara into a cultural fabric that extended beyond any single settlement. The desert, which today divides, once connected. It was not a barrier, but a bridge. The richness of these discoveries forces us to reconsider our assumptions about prehistory. For centuries, deserts were seen as empty spaces on the map, places between the centers of civilization. Yet the Sahara of the African humid period was itself a center, alive with culture, trade, art, and ritual. Its peoples may not have left behind pyramids or writing, but they left behind evidence of lives lived with purpose and imagination. They remind us that civilization is not defined only by monuments of stone, but also by communities that shape meaning from their world. As the desert advanced, many of these cultures were forced to abandon their homes. The lakes shrank, rivers dried, grasslands vanished. But they did not simply disappear. They migrated, carrying their knowledge and traditions with them. Some moved into the Nile Valley, contributing to the rise of ancient Egypt. Others traveled south into the Sahel, influencing the cultures that would later flourish there. In this way, the forgotten peoples of the Sahara are not lost at all. Their memory lives on in the civilizations that followed, hidden but present, buried like their bones beneath the sand, yet still shaping the story of humanity. The Sahara today gives no sign of these lives. The wind erases footprints, the dunes shift endlessly, the silence seems eternal. But beneath that silence lies evidence of cities without walls, villages without monuments, cultures without written names. They are the forgotten peoples of the Sahara, remembered only through bones, art, and artifacts, yet no less real than the civilizations whose monuments still stand. The desert tried to erase them, but their memory endures, waiting to be uncovered. The more we uncover about the Sahara's forgotten peoples, the clearer it becomes that this desert is not an empty void, but a vast archive. Each skeleton, each shard of pottery, each painting on stone is a page from a book written in human lives. Yet this book is fragmented, scattered, and half erased. Archaeologists must piece together its story from what little the desert has preserved. It is a delicate process, for the Sahara is both destroyer and protector. The wind erodes, the sand buries, but in its dryness it also preserves what would otherwise decay. Bones remain intact for thousands of years, pottery retains its patterns, pigments cling to stone. The desert is cruel, but it keeps secrets well. What emerges from these secrets is the story of cultures both diverse and adaptive. In some regions, herders drove cattle across grasslands, following the seasonal cycle of rain. In others, fishers lived by lakes and rivers, crafting harpoons and nets to harvest the waters. Hunters pursued gazelle, antelope, and giraffe, their tools honed to razor edges of stone. Each way of life reflected the possibilities of the land, and together they formed a mosaic of human adaptation. The Sahara was not uniform but varied, its peoples responding to rivers, lakes, and plains in different ways. It was not a single culture but many, all thriving in the same green world. The artifacts of these peoples reveal an attention to detail that speaks of artistry as well as function. Pottery decorated with patterns of dots and lines suggests both creativity and symbolism. Jewelry made from shells or carved bone hints at aesthetic choices, at adornment for the sake of beauty as well as ritual. Tools shaped from exotic stone reveal not only utility but the existence of trade, of networks that carried materials across distances. Each item carries within it the hands of its maker, the choices of a culture that found ways to express identity through objects as much as through survival. Yet the most powerful evidence of their humanity lies in the burials. At Gobero, the sight of a mother buried with her children, their hands entwined, speaks across millennia with an immediacy that words cannot capture. It tells us of grief, of love, of the bonds that unite families even in death. It tells us that these forgotten peoples cared for their dead, that they sought to preserve connection beyond life. In that gesture, frozen under sand for thousands of years, we see ourselves. For all our differences of time and technology, the emotions are the same. We too bury our dead with care, we too adorn them with tokens, we too hold the hands of those we love. The Sahara's burials remind us that the humanity of these forgotten peoples is our own. As the Sahara dried, these cultures faced choices that would determine their fate. Some stayed, clinging to shrinking lakes, adapting as best they could. Others left, following water into the Nile Valley or the Sahel. Their migrations changed the course of history, contributing to the rise of new civilizations. The Nile became a refuge, gathering peoples displaced by the desert, weaving their traditions into the fabric of Egypt. The Sahel became a zone of transition, where herding and farming practices spread and took root. The forgotten peoples of the Sahara did not vanish without trace. They became part of the great river of humanity, their memory carried in genes, in traditions, in the invisible threads of culture. Today, their story is still being written. Each excavation reveals new fragments, each analysis adds detail, each discovery deepens our understanding. But the Sahara holds far more than we have yet uncovered. Beneath its dunes may lie entire villages, unknown cemeteries, artifacts that could transform our picture of prehistory. The desert is vast, and only a fraction has been studied. It is a library of buried histories, waiting for patient hands and keen eyes to read it. The lesson of these forgotten peoples is profound. They show us that deserts are not barriers, but stages of change. They remind us that what seems eternal is only temporary, that cultures rise and fall with the rhythms of climate, that survival requires adaptation and movement. They remind us that even when names and languages are lost, humanity endures in bones, in art, in memory. They show us that the Sahara, far from empty, was once a cradle of culture, a place where humans lived with meaning and where their memory still lingers beneath the sand. The Sahara's dunes conceal cities without walls, cemeteries without names, cultures without monuments. They are buried, forgotten, and silent. Yet they speak if we are willing to listen. They tell us that the desert was once alive with people, that its silence is an illusion, that beneath the sand lies a history as rich as any on earth. And as we turn the page from these forgotten peoples, we find another form of memory written on stone itself, art that depicts animals long vanished, art that remembers a green world where the desert now rules. Across the barren cliffs of the Sahara, in caves and on canyon walls, there are windows into a world that no longer exists. Painted in ochre, carved into stone, etched with careful hands thousands of years ago, these images are silent witnesses of the green Sahara. They are scenes of rivers and lakes, of herds of elephants and giraffes, of hunters chasing antelope, of cattle tended by herders, of people swimming in waters that no longer flow. In a desert that now seems lifeless, these artworks are living proof that the land was once fertile. They are memories in stone, a gallery preserved by the very dryness that erased the world they depict. The art of the Sahara is among the most remarkable prehistoric traditions on Earth. Tens of thousands of petroglyphs and paintings have been discovered across North Africa, from Mauritania in the west to Sudan in the east. The most famous of these sites is Tassili Nadjer in Algeria, a vast plateau where cliffs and canyons are covered with images that span thousands of years of human life. Here, in an environment where rain is now almost unknown, artists painted scenes of water and grass, animals that roamed freely, humans who lived in abundance. The contrast is almost unbearable. To stand before these paintings today, surrounded by silence and sand, is to confront the dissonance between past and present in its starkest form. The earliest artworks date to around 12,000 years ago, during the peak of the African humid period. They show animals that thrived in the green Sahara. Elephants, giraffes, rhinos, antelope, crocodiles. They show hunters with bows and arrows, sometimes running alongside dogs, sometimes chasing game into traps. The detail is striking. A giraffe stretches its neck to nibble at leaves, a hunter pulls back a bow, a crocodile slides through water. These are not abstract symbols. They are observations, careful records of daily life, etched by people who lived among the creatures they depicted. The Sahara's earliest artists were naturalists as much as they were storytellers. Later periods of art reflect changes in human culture. Around 8,000 years ago, paintings begin to show cattle in abundance. Herds are depicted with horns and markings, herders walking beside them, families tending to animals that had become central to their lives. This is the era of pastoralists, when humans in the Green Sahara shifted from hunting and fishing to herding and more settled ways of life. The art reflects this shift with clarity. Where earlier paintings show hunters chasing wild animals, later scenes depict humans in close relationship with domesticated cattle. The Sahara's art records the transition of human culture, frozen in time on canyon walls. Among the most enigmatic of the Sahara's artworks are the so-called round-head figures, found in Tassili en Adjer. These are large, ghostly images of humans with oversized circular heads, painted in red and white pigments. Some appear to float, others to dance in groups, others to stand with arms outstretched. Their meaning is uncertain. Some scholars interpret them as representations of spiritual beings, perhaps gods or ancestors. Others see them as depictions of ritual or trance states. Whatever their meaning, they suggest a depth of imagination and belief that extends beyond mere survival. The round-head figures remind us that the people of the Green Sahara were not only hunters and herders, but also dreamers, storytellers, and creators of myth. The preservation of this art is itself a miracle of the desert. In wetter climates, pigments fade, carvings erode, and walls collapse. But in the Sahara, where rain is rare and air is dry, paintings remain vivid for thousands of years. The very aridity that ended the Green Sahara has protected its memory. When archaeologists first studied Tassili en Adjer in the mid-20th century, they were astonished by the sheer abundance of images, a gallery stretching for kilometers. French explorer Henri Lotte called it the greatest museum of prehistoric art in the world. Even today, new discoveries are made as researchers venture deeper into remote canyons and cliffs. The animals depicted in this art are not only records of what once existed, but also guides to understanding the Sahara's past environment. The presence of elephants, hippos, and crocodiles shows that rivers and wetlands must have been widespread. The images of cattle suggest that grasslands stretched across vast areas. Even the depiction of swimming humans, found in the Cave of Swimmers in Egypt's Gilf Kebir Plateau, tells us that pools and lakes once existed in what is now one of the driest regions on Earth. Each painting is a piece of evidence, a data point in the reconstruction of the Sahara's vanished ecosystems. The art also reveals the emotional lives of its creators. To paint is to remember, to record, to express. The hunters who carved antelope into stone were not only documenting prey but celebrating the chase. The herders who painted cattle were not only recording their wealth but expressing pride and identity. The figures who danced in groups may have been preserving rituals of joy or worship. Through art, the people of the Green Sahara reached across millennia to speak to us. Their voices may be silent, their names forgotten, but their images endure. In the Sahara's art, we see memory made visible. We see animals long vanished, rivers long dry, humans long buried. The desert has tried to erase them, but the cliffs remember. And in those memories, we are given a glimpse into a world that feels almost impossible today, a world where the Sahara was alive, green, and full of life. The rock art of the Sahara is more than decoration on stone. It is a library without words, a chronicle etched into cliffs and caves by people who understood that images could outlast speech. Every animal drawn, every figure painted, is a sentence in a story that stretches across thousands of years. To walk among these galleries is to enter into dialogue with people who lived in a world utterly different from the one we see today, yet whose concerns were recognizably human. They celebrated abundance, marked rituals, and sought to capture the essence of their lives in pigment and line. The sheer number of these artworks is staggering. Archaeologists estimate that Tassili en Adjer alone contains more than 15,000 individual images spread across vast sandstone formations. Other sites in Libya, Niger, Chad, and Egypt add tens of thousands more. Collectively, the Sahara may hold one of the richest concentrations of prehistoric art on Earth. Each site tells a slightly different story, reflecting local environments and cultures. Some emphasize cattle, others wild animals, others abstract figures. Together, they weave a tapestry of life in the Green Sahara that words cannot fully convey. One striking feature of these artworks is their changing style over time. Early engravings from 12,000 years ago are dominated by large animals drawn with simple but powerful lines. They reflect a hunter's world, where wild creatures defined existence. Later paintings, from around 8 to 5,000 years ago, become more complex and colorful, with humans and cattle at the center. They show herders with elaborate clothing, women adorned with jewelry, men guiding animals, families gathered in scenes of daily life. These images reflect a new relationship between humans and the land, one defined not only by hunting but by domestication and community. The art evolves as culture evolves, marking the passage of time across stone. Even the pigments themselves tell a story. Ancient artists ground minerals into powders, mixing them with animal fat or plant sap to create paints that have endured for millennia. Red ochre, yellow iron oxide, white kaolin clay, and black charcoal were their palette. The durability of these pigments, combined with the Sahara's dryness, explains why the images remain so vivid today. To create art in this way required knowledge, effort, and intent. It was not casual doodling, but deliberate expression, aimed at recording memory or evoking meaning. Animals dominate much of the art, and their presence provides crucial evidence of past ecosystems. Elephants appear frequently, sometimes in herds, sometimes alone, often depicted with curved tusks and massive bodies. Their presence indicates grasslands rich enough to sustain them. Giraffes are shown striding with elegant necks, suggesting open plains with tall trees. Hippos wallow in rivers, crocodiles glide through waters, antelope run across meadows. Each image is a clue, confirming that the Sahara was once a paradise of biodiversity. For archaeologists and paleoclimatologists, these paintings are not only cultural artifacts, but ecological records. The human figures are just as revealing. Some show hunters with bows, their bodies in dynamic poses, arrows drawn back, muscles tensed. Others depict herders with staffs and animals at their side, calm and composed. Some scenes show families with men, women, and children gathered together. These images humanize the Sahara's past, showing us that life here was not only about survival but also about community, ritual, and joy. The dancers painted in circles, the swimmers captured mid-stroke, the figures adorned with jewelry, all suggest that these forgotten peoples lived with complexity and imagination. The mysterious round-head figures remain among the most haunting. Painted in soft red or white, they often lack facial features, their large circular heads giving them an otherworldly appearance. Some float above the ground, others stretch arms outward, as if in flight or worship. Others cluster in groups as though engaged in ceremony. Scholars debate their meaning. Were they gods, spirits, ancestors, or simply stylized humans? Their ambiguity is part of their power, for they suggest that the Sahara's ancient peoples engaged with ideas of the sacred, of forces beyond the visible world. The roundheads remind us that prehistoric art is not only about recording what is seen, but also about expressing what is felt, imagined, or believed. The Cave of Swimmers in Egypt's Gilf Kebir Plateau adds another layer to this story. Discovered in the 20th century, it contains paintings of human figures shown with arms outstretched, legs moving in swimming motions, surrounded by wavy lines that suggest water. Today, the cave lies in one of the driest parts of the Sahara, where rain has not fallen for centuries. Yet these images prove that pools once existed here, and that people swam in them for joy as well as survival. The Cave of Swimmers became famous when it appeared in the film The English Patient, but its true significance lies in its testimony. It is evidence that the Sahara was once so wet that even recreation took place in water, a reality unthinkable today. Through these artworks, the Sahara's forgotten peoples left behind more than fossils or bones. They left us their vision of the world, their memory of animals, their rituals, their joys, their fears. In stone and pigment, they preserved a record of abundance, of a green paradise swallowed by sand. When we look at these images, we are not only studying archaeology, we are listening to voices from the past, voices that speak without words, but with clarity nonetheless. The art of the Sahara shows us that memory can endure even when landscapes vanish. It shows us that deserts can forget nothing, that silence can be filled with echoes, that stone can remember where rivers once ran. And as we study these memories, we are drawn ever closer to the moment when the green Sahara began to die, when the rains failed, when the art became the only witness of a vanishing world. The art of the Sahara does not merely depict animals and humans. It captures the rhythm of a world in transition, a world where abundance slowly gave way to loss. The earliest paintings celebrate water and wild creatures, but as centuries passed and the rains began to falter, the subjects changed. Cattle herding grew more prominent, hunting scenes less frequent. The round head figures, once central, faded into images of daily pastoral life. In this progression, we can see how the Sahara's art became both record and prophecy, showing not only what was, but what was slipping away. When the desert advanced, the people who remained carried their art with them. Even as rivers shrank, they painted cattle along cliffs, perhaps as prayers for fertility and survival. Even as lakes dried, they carved images of hippos and crocodiles, perhaps in memory of what they had once known. Art became both remembrance and resistance, a way of holding onto a world that was vanishing. The paintings of the late humid period are tinged with this poignancy. They are beautiful, but they are also elegies, silent laments etched into stone. The endurance of these artworks is itself remarkable. The pigments still cling to walls after thousands of years, lines of engravings remain sharp, scenes remain visible despite the passage of time. In many cases, the desert's dryness has preserved them better than museums could. To look upon a hunter's bow, drawn in ochre 6 or 7 millennia ago, is to feel the immediacy of his hand. The brushstrokes remain, the gesture endures, the presence of the artist lingers. It is as though time has folded, bringing us face to face with those who lived in a world utterly different from our own, yet connected through the universal impulse to create. What makes the Sahara's art especially haunting is the silence that surrounds it. When we view the cave paintings of Europe, we often stand in fertile valleys where animals still roam and rivers still run. The scenes, though ancient, remain familiar. But in the Sahara, the art confronts us with absence. The elephants, giraffes, and crocodiles that once lived here are gone. The rivers and lakes have dried, the grasslands have vanished. The silence presses down, making the paintings feel like messages from ghosts. They are not only art, but testimony, proof that life was once abundant, where today there is nothing. For scientists, the art is invaluable evidence. It helps reconstruct the Sahara's climate history, providing visual confirmation of what fossils and sediments suggest. It shows the range of animals, the presence of water, the activities of humans. For historians, it expands our understanding of culture, revealing societies that created not only tools but symbols, not only shelters but stories. And for all of us, it offers a glimpse into the imagination of our ancestors, showing that creativity is as old as survival itself. The animals depicted in these artworks are more than records of species. They are symbols of abundance, of the bond between humans and their environment. To paint a giraffe stretching its neck to the trees is to celebrate the grace of the creature, to honor its presence. To carve a crocodile into stone is to acknowledge its power, its place in the waters that sustained life. To draw cattle with horns and markings is to affirm identity, wealth, and continuity. Each animal, in its own way, is both real and symbolic, both natural history and cultural expression. When we consider the Sahara's art in its entirety, a pattern emerges. It begins with wild animals, shifts to pastoral life, and ends with echoes of memory as the desert encroached. It is a timeline carved into cliffs, a sequence that mirrors the rise and fall of the Green Sahara. It tells us that the people here lived fully, adapted to change, and tried to preserve their world in images even as it slipped away. It tells us that art is not only beauty but survival, a way of making meaning in the face of uncertainty. The memory of animals preserved in this art is especially powerful. Today, to see a giraffe or elephant, one must travel far to savannas of Central and Southern Africa. But in the paintings of Tassili and Ager, these animals stride across what is now desert. Their presence is a reminder that ecosystems are not permanent, that landscapes transform, that abundance can become absence. The art of the Sahara is therefore both a celebration and a warning. It shows us what was gained in times of water and what was lost when the rains failed. Standing before these ancient galleries, one cannot help but feel awe, sorrow, and humility. Awe at the skill and imagination of the artists, sorrow at the loss of the world they depicted, humility at the reminder that human cultures are fragile before the power of climate. The Sahara's art is not merely prehistoric decoration, it is a mirror held up to time, showing us both our origins and our impermanence. As we leave behind the memory of animals painted on stone, we move into the next chapter of this story, the death of the Green Sahara itself. For while the art preserves its memory, the desert tells of its demise. The rains stopped, the rivers dried, the lakes vanished. The green world that inspired so much creativity collapsed, leaving behind silence and sand. To understand the Sahara fully, we must now confront the question of how and why it died. The Sahara is the largest hot desert on Earth, stretching across more than 9 million square kilometers, a sea of sand and stone that seems eternal. Yet its present form is an illusion of permanence. Only a few thousand years ago, it was green, dotted with lakes and threaded with rivers, alive with herds of elephants and giraffes, crocodiles and hippos, and communities of humans who fished, hunted, herded, and painted their world upon stone. The great question is not whether the Sahara was once green, for the evidence is overwhelming, but why it died. The transformation of the Sahara from savanna to desert is one of the most dramatic environmental shifts in human history. A reminder that climate is never fixed and that even entire landscapes can vanish. To understand how the Sahara died, we must look to the rhythms of Earth itself. Our planet's climate is shaped not only by weather or geography, but also by long cycles in its orbit and tilt, known as Milankovitch cycles. Named after Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic, these cycles describe how Earth's path around the Sun changes slowly over tens of thousands of years. Sometimes the orbit is more circular, sometimes more elliptical. Sometimes Earth tilts more steeply, sometimes less. These shifts alter the distribution of sunlight across the planet, strengthening or weakening monsoons, raising or lowering global temperatures, and driving the advance and retreat of ice ages. They are the hidden clockwork of climate, invisible to human eyes, yet powerful enough to transform continents. Around 12,000 years ago, Earth's orbit and tilt aligned in a way that strengthened the African monsoon. Moisture from the Atlantic and Indian Oceans swept deep into North Africa, bringing rains that turned the Sahara into a green paradise. Lakes swelled, rivers roared, grasslands spread, and ecosystems flourished. Humans migrated into this fertile land, building communities and leaving behind art and burials that testify to its abundance. This was the African humid period, a gift of orbital mechanics as much as of rainfall, but the same cycles that gave life also foretold its end. Gradually, Earth's orbit shifted again. The monsoons weakened. Rains came later, ended sooner, and fell less often. Over centuries, the lakes shrank, rivers dwindled, and grasslands began to wither. What had been abundance turned to scarcity. To those who lived through it, the change may not have been obvious within a single lifetime. A grandparent might have told stories of rivers that seemed smaller to their grandchildren, but the shift unfolded slowly, a creeping dryness that grew worse with each passing generation. This is the cruelty of climate change. It is often too slow to be noticed day by day, yet too fast to be escaped across centuries. The death of the Sahara was not a sudden collapse but a long unraveling. By about 6,000 years ago, the first signs of decline were unmistakable. Lakes that had been vast inland seas retreated from their shores. Wetlands shrank, leaving cracked mud and salt flats where fish had once swum. Crocodiles and hippos, once widespread, disappeared as their habitats vanished. Herds of elephants and giraffes moved southward, following the retreating line of rainfall. Hunters who had once pursued gazelle and antelope across open plains now found fewer animals to track. Herders who had driven cattle through lush grasslands now faced parched fields and failing herds. The Sahara's abundance was slipping away. For humans, the drying of the Sahara meant more than loss of food. It meant displacement. Communities who had lived for generations beside lakes and rivers now had to abandon their homes. Cemeteries like Gabbero, once places of continuity, were deserted as water vanished. Families packed their belongings, moving toward the Nile, the Sahel, or other regions where rainfall was still reliable. These migrations reshaped the map of human culture, concentrating people in fertile valleys and contributing to the rise of civilizations. In this sense, the death of the Sahara was also the birth of new societies. But for those who lived through it, the experience must have felt like slow exile, a steady loss of the land they had known. The science of the Sahara's death is written in sediments and fossils. By drilling into the beds of dried lakes, researchers have recovered layers of mud that record ancient climates. Pollen grains preserved in these sediments show the transition from grasslands to desert scrub, from wetlands to dunes. Fossilized shells of freshwater snails vanish from the record as lakes dried. Even chemical signatures in ancient soils reveal the retreat of moisture. Each line of evidence confirms the same story. The Sahara did not simply fade. It transformed dramatically, in less than a few thousand years, from one of the most fertile regions on Earth to one of the harshest. This transformation was not caused by humans, but by the natural rhythms of Earth's orbit. Yet its impact on humans was profound. The peoples of the Green Sahara had no way to control the monsoon or to halt the advance of the desert. Their only choice was to adapt or leave. Some became nomads, following the last patches of grass with their herds. Others settled along permanent rivers, especially the Nile, where abundance persisted. Still others moved into the Sahel, creating new cultural traditions that carried echoes of the Sahara's lost world. The desert had died, but its people endured. The story of how the Sahara died is not only a lesson about the past, it is also a warning about the future. Climate can transform landscapes, erase ecosystems, and displace populations. The Sahara reminds us that what seems permanent is fragile, that abundance can vanish, that adaptation is essential. Today, as our world faces rapid climate change driven not by orbital cycles but by human activity, the story of the Sahara is more urgent than ever. It tells us that even great ecosystems can collapse, that human societies are shaped by the environments they depend upon, and that survival requires foresight as well as resilience. The Green Sahara is gone, buried beneath dunes, preserved only in fossils, art, and memory. But its death was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of new ones, the rise of civilizations along the Nile, the spread of cultures across Africa, the creation of myths that remembered a land lost to time. To follow the story further, we must trace how the drying of the Sahara pushed peoples into new landscapes and gave rise to one of the greatest cultures in human history, ancient Egypt. The collapse of the Green Sahara did not happen everywhere at once. In some regions, lakes lingered longer, fed by the last remnants of rainfall. In others, the desert advanced more quickly, swallowing grasslands and leaving behind salt flats where water had once shimmered. This unevenness created pockets of survival, refuges where humans and animals held on even as the larger ecosystem unraveled. For a time, crocodiles and hippos clung to isolated wetlands, giraffes grazed on the last patches of green, and herders led cattle along shrinking pastures. But these islands of life were temporary. One by one they disappeared, leaving only the desert behind. For the people who lived through this transition, the experience must have been one of both memory and loss. The old stories would have spoken of rivers that no longer flowed, of lakes that had receded into mud, of animals that had vanished from the plains. Generations passed down memories of abundance even as they struggled with scarcity. The art of the Sahara captures this poignancy. In later paintings, animals are fewer, cattle more prominent, and human figures sometimes depicted in scenes of migration. The very act of painting may have been an attempt to preserve what was disappearing, to hold on to images of a world that their children might never see again. The science of this transition is written in the earth itself. In sediments taken from Lake Yoa in northern Chad, cores reveal the story of decline in microscopic detail. Pollen from grasses dominates the record during the height of the humid period, replaced gradually by pollen from desert plants as the climate dried. Dust layers grow thicker, showing how winds carried sand across the landscape as vegetation vanished. Fossil remains of freshwater snails and fish abruptly end, replaced by evidence of aridity. This record is a timeline of collapse, each layer a step in the Sahara's death. It is one of the clearest environmental transformations preserved in the geological archive. The cause of this collapse lies in the slow turning of Earth's orbital clock. As the tilt of Earth's axis decreased and the orbit shifted, summer sunlight in the northern hemisphere weakened. Monsoons that had once swept northward carrying moisture into the Sahara retreated southward. The rains no longer reached deep into the desert. Without water, grasslands died, and without vegetation to anchor the soil, dunes advanced. What had been fertile became barren, not through catastrophe, but through the steady force of celestial cycles. This is the paradox of the Sahara's death. It was not violent, but inexorable. Humans adapted in many ways. Some became nomads, moving constantly in search of water, herding cattle across vast distances, following the last traces of rain. These nomads preserved elements of the Green Sahara's lifestyle, but always under pressure from scarcity. Others abandoned the desert altogether, migrating toward more reliable rivers and valleys. The Nile became one of the great beneficiaries of this migration. Populations swelled as displaced peoples settled along its banks, bringing with them skills in herding, pottery, and perhaps even early farming. The cultural foundations of ancient Egypt may have been laid, in part, by refugees of the dying Sahara. The desert's loss became the Nile's gain. For the ecosystems of the Sahara, the collapse was devastating. Species that had thrived for millennia vanished from the region. Fossils tell us that elephants, rhinos, giraffes, and lions once roamed across what is now desert. Today, only scattered remnants of these species survive in the Sahel and further south. Crocodiles, once common, disappeared almost entirely, though tiny populations survive in rare Saharan oases as living fossils of a wetter past. The biodiversity of the Sahara collapsed as the climate dried, leaving only sparse desert species to endure. The drying also left behind immense fossil aquifers, reservoirs of water trapped underground. These aquifers are remnants of the lakes and rivers that once filled the Sahara. Today they hold volumes of water greater than the flow of the Nile, hidden beneath the sand. They are both relics of the past and resources for the present, tapped by wells in Libya, Egypt, and Chad. Yet they are not renewable on human timescales. They are fossil waters, created in an age when the Sahara was green, and once drained they will not return until the rains do, tens of thousands of years from now. The Sahara's death created not only desert but also hidden treasures, gifts of its lost rivers preserved underground. The cultural consequences of the Sahara's collapse resonate across Africa. The spread of herding and farming into the Sahel and the Nile Valley shaped the course of history. Languages, traditions, and technologies carried by migrating peoples blended into new cultures. The memory of lost rivers and lakes may even echo in myths and legends, stories of lands that were once fertile but became barren. Though the people of the Sahara left no written records, their legacy endures in the civilizations that followed, in the art that remembers them, and in the very bones buried beneath the dunes. The death of the Sahara was both an ending and a beginning. It ended the age of green abundance, but it began the age of civilizations that flourished on its edges. The desert became a barrier, but also a border that defined the Nile Valley, the Sahel, and the Mediterranean world. Its silence became part of the identity of Africa, a vast expanse that shaped trade, migration, and culture for millennia. To understand how the Sahara died is to understand how human history was redirected, how the loss of one world created the conditions for another. As we trace the arc of this transformation, we see that the Sahara's death was not final. The cycles of Earth continue, and one day, tens of thousands of years in the future, the rains may return. The Sahara may bloom again, its rivers flowing, its lakes shimmering, its grasslands alive with herds. The desert is not eternal, but part of a cycle larger than human history. Its present barrenness is only one chapter in a much longer story. For now, though, its silence remains, and its memory is buried in stone, sand, and the remnants of civilizations displaced by its drying. The silence that now rules the Sahara is the final stage of a process that unfolded over millennia. When the last rains weakened, the land surrendered piece by piece. Wetlands retreated into isolated pockets, then into muddy hollows, then into nothing. Forests and grasslands thinned until only hardy shrubs clung to the soil. Dunes advanced like slow tides, covering villages, riverbeds, and even cemeteries where generations had been buried. The Sahara that had once been green and fertile dissolved into sand, leaving behind only memory. For the people who lived through it, this was not a single disaster, but a creeping exile. Each generation inherited less water, fewer animals, and more desert. It was a transformation so complete that within a few thousand years, no trace of the green world remained on the surface. The evidence of this change survives not only in sediments and fossils, but also in the myths of later peoples. Across North Africa and the Sahel, stories speak of lands that were once fertile but turned to desert, of rivers that vanished, of animals that retreated never to return. These tales, passed down across centuries, may be fragments of cultural memory, faint echoes of the drying Sahara. They remind us that climate is not only a physical force but also a cultural one, shaping not only ecosystems but also the imagination of those who live through its shifts. The death of the Sahara was not only an environmental event, it was a human experience, remembered in stories as well as bones. For science, the Sahara's death provides a rare opportunity to study rapid climate change on a grand scale. In less than a few thousand years, the region transformed from one of the most fertile ecosystems on Earth to one of the harshest deserts. This transformation is preserved in every layer of soil, every pollen grain, every ancient shoreline traced across the desert floor. By studying these records, scientists gain insight not only into the Sahara's past, but into the future of our own climate. The Sahara shows how quickly abundance can become absence, how ecosystems can collapse, and how human societies must adapt or vanish. The legacy of the Sahara's death extends far beyond its boundaries. As people migrated out of the drying desert, they carried with them skills, traditions, and technologies. Into the Nile Valley came herders and fishers, bringing pottery, domesticated cattle, and knowledge of the land. Into the Sahel came farmers and nomads, spreading practices that would shape African cultures for millennia. The desert's collapse scattered its people, but in scattering them, it seeded new civilizations. The silence of the Sahara became the foundation of the Nile's abundance, the Sahel's diversity, and the cultural networks that linked Africa to the Mediterranean and beyond. The ruins of the Green Sahara remain hidden beneath sand, but sometimes the desert reveals its past. After rare rains, dry lakes briefly fill, exposing shells and fish bones that have lain untouched for thousands of years. Strong winds sometimes uncover fossils of giraffes, elephants, or crocodiles in places where no water has flowed for millennia. Archaeologists continue to find tools, pottery, and burials beneath dunes, reminders that the desert was once alive. These discoveries are not only scientific but emotional. They remind us that the Sahara is not only sand but also memory, that beneath its silence lie voices waiting to be heard. The story of how the Sahara died is also a story of resilience. The people who lived here did not simply vanish. They adapted, moved, and carried their knowledge forward. Their descendants built civilizations along the Nile, established cultures in the Sahel, and left behind traditions that still echo today. The Sahara itself may seem lifeless, but its people endured, reshaping themselves in response to change. Their resilience is part of our shared human heritage, a reminder that survival often means transformation. When we stand at the edge of the Sahara today, gazing across dunes that stretch to the horizon, it is tempting to think of the desert as eternal. Yet the evidence tells a different story. The Sahara was green, and it will be green again. Its death was only a phase in Earth's cycles, a chapter in a story that spans tens of thousands of years. For now, the desert holds its silence, but beneath that silence lies water in ancient aquifers, fossils of vanished animals, art carved into cliffs, and bones of forgotten peoples. The Sahara died, but it did not disappear. Its memory is buried, waiting to be uncovered. The transition from green to desert was one of the most dramatic transformations in human history. It shaped cultures, redirected migrations, and altered the course of civilization. It was both tragedy and opportunity, loss and renewal. and it leaves us with a lesson that is as relevant now as it was thousands of years ago. The Earth changes, and we must change with it. The Sahara's death is a warning carved into sand, a reminder that climate has the power to reshape entire worlds, and that those who endure are those who adapt. From the silence of the Sahara, we turn now to the Nile, the river that absorbed the displaced peoples of the desert and gave rise to one of humanity's greatest civilizations. The story of the Sahara does not end with its death. It continues along the banks of the Nile, where water remained, where abundance persisted, and where the memory of the green desert may have helped shape the rise of Egypt itself. When the rains faded and the Sahara began its slow death, people who had lived for generations in a green and fertile land faced choices that would define their destiny. Some clung to shrinking lakes and fading grasslands, hoping the rains would return. Others set out across the desert, searching for new sources of water. Their migrations carried them into the Sahel, into the Mediterranean fringes, and above all into the valley of the Nile. The drying of the Sahara was not just a story of loss. It was also the catalyst for one of humanity's greatest transformations. Out of the collapse of the Green Sahara rose the civilization of ancient Egypt. The Nile was already a mighty river long before the Sahara died. Fed by rains in the Ethiopian highlands and the equatorial lakes, it carried water northward through thousands of kilometers of valley and canyon before spilling into the Mediterranean Sea. Each year, the river flooded its banks, depositing rich silt that nourished crops and sustained life. The Nile was a ribbon of abundance cutting through arid land, a natural oasis that never failed even when the surrounding regions grew dry. As the Sahara withered, the Nile remained, and it became the refuge for displaced peoples fleeing the desert. Archaeological evidence suggests that waves of migration from the Sahara poured into the Nile Valley during the late African humid period. Communities that had once lived by Saharan lakes and rivers arrived with knowledge of fishing, herding, and pottery. They joined earlier populations along the Nile, blending traditions and creating new ones. Some carried cattle with them, bringing the pastoral practices that had defined the Green Sahara. Others brought artistic traditions, memories of animals that no longer roamed, and rituals born beside vanished rivers. The Nile became not only a refuge but also a crucible, where the memory of the Sahara mingled with the abundance of the river to create something new. This blending of peoples and traditions may have laid the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Long before pyramids rose on the Giza Plateau, before pharaohs ruled from palaces, communities along the Nile were experimenting with agriculture, building villages, and developing cultural practices that would evolve into the hallmarks of Egypt. Pottery styles traceable to Saharan origins appear in early Nile settlements. Rock art in the eastern desert and near the Nile shows animals long vanished from the Sahara, suggesting that migrants carried their memories with them. Even burial practices show continuity with Saharan traditions, with bodies arranged carefully and accompanied by ornaments. The Nile itself was transformed by the loss of the Sahara. During the African humid period, tributaries from the Sahara fed into the Nile, swelling its waters. As these tributaries dried, populations that had once lived along them moved into the main valley, concentrating human life along the river. The Nile thus became more than a river. It became the backbone of a civilization, supporting dense populations, enabling agriculture, and creating the conditions for social complexity. The desert's death funneled life into the valley, sharpening the contrast between the fertile floodplain and the barren land beyond. The relationship between the Sahara and the Nile was not only one of migration, but also of memory. The people of the Nile carried with them stories of a green land lost to time, of rivers that had dried, of animals that had vanished. Some scholars suggest that Egyptian myths of primeval waters and chaotic deserts may echo these memories, shaped by generations who had witnessed the Sahara's transformation. The contrast between fertile valley and barren desert became a central theme in Egyptian culture, symbolizing order and chaos, life and death. The Sahara's loss was inscribed into the very mythology of the Nile. The rise of Egypt cannot be explained by the Nile alone. Rivers elsewhere in the world also created fertile floodplains, yet few produced civilizations of comparable scale. The key may lie in the convergence of circumstances, the abundance of the Nile, combined with the influx of displaced peoples from the Sahara. These migrants brought with them resilience forged in the struggle against desertification, knowledge of herding and adaptation, and traditions of art and ritual. The Nile gave them stability, and together these forces created the foundations of pharaonic culture. The Sahara's death was Egypt's beginning. As Egyptian civilization grew, the desert remained both barrier and protector. To the west, the Sahara stretched endlessly, discouraging invasion and isolating the Nile Valley from external threats. To the east, the eastern desert offered routes to the Red Sea, but also challenges of survival. The desert was emptiness, but it was also shield. Egypt's monuments rose in the contrast between fertile valley and barren desert, a civilization carved into the edge of two worlds. The memory of the Sahara's lost rivers and peoples may have persisted as faint echoes, but by the time pyramids rose, the desert had fully claimed its silence. Modern science confirms the deep link between the Sahara and the Nile. Satellite imagery reveals ancient river channels that once connected the desert to the Nile. Fossil evidence shows species that migrated along these routes. Archaeological finds demonstrate cultural continuity between Saharan and Nile traditions. The story of Egypt cannot be told without the Sahara, just as the story of the Sahara cannot be told without the Nile. They are twin chapters in a single narrative, bound together by climate, migration, and adaptation. When we look at the Nile today, we see a river that has nourished millions for thousands of years. But hidden within its history is the memory of a desert that once was green, of peoples who carried their culture from vanished lakes into fertile floodplains, of a transformation that turned collapse into creation. The Sahara died, but in dying it gave rise to Egypt. This paradox is one of the most profound lessons of history. Out of loss comes renewal, out of exile comes foundation, out of silence comes voice. The Sahara and the Nile remind us that civilizations are shaped not only by ingenuity, but by environment, not only by human effort, but by the rhythms of Earth itself. The desert that seems eternal was once green, and its death helped create one of the greatest cultures in human history. To uncover this truth is to see that history is not only built by kings and monuments, but also by climate, migration, and the hidden forces of the natural world. As we leave the Nile behind and return our gaze to the desert, we encounter another mystery carved into the Sahara's surface. In Mauritania, a massive circular structure spans 50 kilometers, so vast it can be seen from space. It is called the Eye of the Sahara, or the Richat structure. For centuries it has inspired speculation, myths of lost cities, even whispers of Atlantis. To understand what lies beneath the Sahara, we must confront this structure not with myth, but with science. From high above the Earth, the Sahara appears as a vast expanse of golden sand and barren rock, broken only by the faint lines of ancient riverbeds and the shadows of mountains. Yet, in the heart of Mauritania, on the western edge of the desert, there is a formation so unusual that it arrests the gaze even from orbit. It is a perfect circle, 50 kilometers across, made of concentric rings of rock that ripple outward like the mark of a colossal impact. Astronauts have seen it from space and called it the Eye of the Sahara. Scientists name it the Richat structure. For centuries it has been a riddle carved into the desert, its origins debated, its symmetry inviting both science and myth. At first glance, the Eye of the Sahara seems like an impact crater, the scar of a massive asteroid strike. Its circular shape, its concentric ridges, its size all suggest the violence of a celestial body colliding with Earth. Indeed, when geologists first studied it in the mid-20th century, many assumed it must be just that. But as evidence accumulated, the impact theory unraveled. The rocks within the structure showed no signs of the shocked quartz or melted glass that mark true impact sites. Instead, they revealed a different story, one of uplift, erosion, and deep time. The Eye of the Sahara, far from being the scar of catastrophe, is the remnant of geological forces playing out over hundreds of millions of years. The Richat structure is a deeply eroded dome, a geological uplift where ancient rocks have been pushed upward by forces within the Earth. Over time, wind and water stripped away layers of softer rock, leaving behind rings of harder strata. The result is a natural bullseye carved into the desert floor. Its rocks span hundreds of millions of years of history, from Proterozoic quartzites at the outer edges to younger volcanic rocks at the center. To walk across it is to move across deep time itself, each ring a chapter in the Earth's geological story. Yet its symmetry is so striking that it has never escaped speculation. Ancient peoples may not have recognized its full shape, visible only from above, but local legends speak of circular mountains and sacred places. In modern times, some have claimed it as evidence of lost civilizations. The most persistent myth links it to Atlantis, the legendary city described by Plato as a circular island of concentric rings of land and water. Enthusiasts point to the eye's shape, its size, and its location near the Atlantic coast as proof. They imagine Atlantis buried beneath the sands, the Richat structure, its last visible trace. But myth and science part ways quickly. Plato's description was a philosophical allegory, not a map, and the geology of the Richat structure has nothing to do with human construction. There are no walls, no harbors, no canals, only natural rock shaped by erosion. The eye is not Atlantis. It is not a city, nor a ruin, nor the mark of gods. It is Earth itself, sculpted by its own slow forces, a reminder that nature can create shapes as perfect as any human design. To claim it as Atlantis is to miss its true wonder, the story it tells of Earth's history written in stone. For scientists, the eye of the Sahara is not a mystery to be solved, but a treasure to be studied. Its rocks record the history of ancient oceans, volcanic eruptions, and tectonic uplift. Fossils within its strata reveal life forms long extinct, creatures that swam in seas that covered Africa hundreds of millions of years ago. The eye is a geological archive, a window into epochs that make human history seem like a blink of time. To stand within it is to stand in the center of a clock that measures not centuries but eons. Yet the allure of the eye goes beyond science. Its form speaks to something deep in human imagination. The circle is a symbol found across cultures of unity, eternity, perfection. To see such a vast circle carved into the earth itself feels uncanny, as though it must carry meaning. This is why myths of Atlantis cling to it, why travelers speak of it in whispers, why even astronauts remark on its strangeness from space. The eye of the Sahara is a reminder that the natural world can appear designed, that order can emerge from chaos, that shapes we associate with intention can arise from blind geology. In the desert surrounding the Richat structure, evidence of ancient human presence has also been found: stone tools, campsites, and traces of settlements. These are not cities, but they show that people lived near the eye during the Green Sahara, when rivers flowed nearby and the land was fertile. To them, the circular mountains may have been landmarks, perhaps even sacred places. We cannot know what they thought as they gazed upon the ridges, but it is easy to imagine that such a unique formation inspired stories, rituals, or reverence. Even without seeing its full shape, they would have felt its strangeness in the landscape. The eye of the Sahara also reminds us how much lies hidden beneath the desert. If such a colossal structure can remain largely unknown until the era of satellites, what else might the Sahara conceal? Beneath its sands are buried rivers, ancient cities, fossils of dinosaurs and extinct mammals, and aquifers of water left from vanished lakes. The eye is not alone. It is part of a larger truth that the Sahara, though seemingly barren, is one of the richest archives of natural and human history on the planet. The scientific unraveling of the eye's geology has not diminished its power. If anything, it has deepened it. To know that these rings are the scars of uplift and erosion, that they preserve rocks older than most continents, that they speak of oceans long gone, is to see the structure not as a mystery solved, but as a wonder revealed. The eye of the Sahara is a reminder that beauty does not require myth to be meaningful. The truth is enough, and in this case, the truth is vast, ancient, and awe-inspiring. As we leave the eye behind, we turn to what else lies beneath the Sahara. Beyond geology and myth, the desert conceals fossils of long-vanished creatures, treasures of stone and bone that tell of ecosystems lost to time. It holds aquifers of water greater than the Nile, hidden reservoirs that remind us of its green past. The Sahara is not only a graveyard of civilizations but also a vault of life, preserving the memory of worlds that flourished long before humans walked its sands. Beneath the Sahara's sands lies not only the memory of rivers and vanished peoples, but also the remains of creatures that lived long before the first human hand carved a stone tool. The desert is both graveyard and treasure vault, a place where the bones of dinosaurs, the fossils of extinct mammals, and even the imprints of ancient fish rest in silence, waiting to be uncovered. It is a land that tells not one story but many, stretching across hundreds of millions of years. To uncover these stories is to see the Sahara not only as a lost garden of human history, but also as a vast museum of life itself. In Niger, the sands have revealed the bones of dinosaurs that roamed the land when it was part of a lush floodplain. Among the most spectacular is Sarcosuchus imperator, a crocodile the length of a bus, its jaws lined with teeth that could crush turtles and dinosaurs alike. Nicknamed the supercroc, it lived 110 million years ago in rivers that coursed across what is now desert. Fossils of fish, turtles, and other crocodile species lie nearby, painting a picture of waters teeming with life. In the same rocks are the remains of plant-eating dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus, with sail-like spines rising from its back, and predatory dinosaurs like Suchomimus, whose long jaws suggest a diet of fish. These fossils tell us that the Sahara was once a land of swamps and forests, rich with creatures that no longer exist. The preservation of these fossils is due in part to the Sahara's geology. Over millions of years, sediments from rivers and lakes buried bones, sealing them away. Later, as the land dried and wind stripped away softer rock, the fossils emerged from the ground, lying exposed on the desert surface. Paleontologists describe walking across stretches of desert where fossils litter the sand, bones eroded from the rock by time itself. Each bone is a clue to an ancient ecosystem, each discovery a window into a vanished world. The Sahara's emptiness is deceptive. It conceals a richness beyond imagination. The desert has also yielded fossils of more recent creatures, mammals that lived during the Green Sahara only tens of thousands of years ago. In caves and dried lake beds, scientists have found bones of elephants, rhinos, lions, and giraffes, evidence that the region once supported the same megafauna seen today on the savannas of East Africa. Some of these animals lingered into human memory, depicted in rock art long after they vanished from the land. Others disappeared as the Sahara dried, their bones left behind as the only record of their passing. To hold such a fossil is to touch the remains of a world that people once knew, a world of abundance erased by climate. But the treasures of the Sahara are not only bones. Buried beneath its sands are vast aquifers, reservoirs of water left from the days when the desert was green. These aquifers are fossil water trapped underground for tens of thousands of years. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer, stretching beneath Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and Chad, contains more fresh water than the Nile River carries in centuries. Wells drilled into this aquifer bring up water that last fell as rain during the African humid period, liquid time capsules from a vanished climate. In Libya, vast engineering projects have tapped this water to irrigate fields, turning desert into farmland. But these waters are not renewable on human timescales. They are remnants, not resources that will replenish. To drain them is to drink the memory of the Green Sahara. These hidden reservoirs remind us of the paradox of deserts. They seem barren, yet they conceal abundance. They appear empty, yet they are full of secrets. The Sahara holds enough underground water to transform its surface if it could be tapped sustainably, yet that water is the echo of a world that no longer exists. It is both treasure and warning, a reminder that the desert is not permanent but the product of cycles, and that what lies beneath may not return until those cycles shift again. Beyond fossils and water, the Sahara also conceals human treasures. Stone tools buried beneath dunes show the progress of technology from crude hand axes to finely crafted arrowheads. Pottery fragments reveal designs that echo across cultures, patterns that may have carried symbolic meaning. Jewelry carved from shells or bone tells us of trade, of connections stretching to distant coasts. Even graves, preserved by sand, yield ornaments of beauty and ritual. Each object is a piece of human presence, a whisper of those who lived and died in lands that now seem uninhabitable. The desert has preserved these treasures with ruthless efficiency. Its dryness halts decay, its sands bury and protect. But it also erases context, scattering artifacts across dunes, separating them from the villages or rivers that gave them meaning. Archaeologists must work with fragments, piecing together lives from shards. It is both a gift and a challenge, for the Sahara conceals as much as it reveals. For paleontologists, archaeologists, and geologists alike, the Sahara is one of the richest frontiers of discovery. Each expedition uncovers fossils of new species, artifacts of unknown cultures, or geological structures that rewrite Earth's history. Yet the desert remains largely unexplored. Its sheer size, its harsh conditions, and its political instability have limited research. Beneath its dunes may lie entire fossil beds, buried cities, or reservoirs yet unknown. What has been found so far may be only a fraction of what the Sahara holds. The meaning of these discoveries is profound. They tell us that the Sahara is not an eternal desert, but a palimpsest, a landscape written and rewritten by time. Beneath its silence lies the roar of ancient rivers, the calls of animals long extinct, the voices of peoples long forgotten. The Sahara is graveyard and archive, vault and museum, silence and memory. To walk across its dunes is to walk across layers of history so deep that they blur the line between human and geological time. As we uncover these fossils, treasures, and reservoirs, we reshape our understanding of the Sahara. It is not a wasteland, but a library, not an emptiness, but a fullness concealed. Its silence is not absence, but preservation. And its lessons are not only about the past, but about the future, reminding us of the fragility of ecosystems, the resilience of humans, and the cycles of Earth that shape our world. From fossils of crocodiles larger than buses to aquifers that hold the last waters of the green Sahara, from the bones of forgotten peoples to the jewelry they wore in life, the desert guards its secrets with sand. Yet, as science peels back its layers, the truth emerges. The Sahara is not dead, only dormant. Its treasures remind us that deserts too were once seas of life. And as we leave these fossils and aquifers behind, we arrive at the final question, the legacy of the buried Sahara itself, and what it means for how we see the world today. The Sahara today seems like the very definition of permanence, a sea of sand stretching across the heart of Africa, endless and silent. But the evidence we have uncovered tells a very different story. 12,000 years ago, this desert was alive. It was green and fertile, covered with grasslands, dotted with lakes, threaded with rivers. Elephants and giraffes roamed where dunes now rise. Crocodiles swam in rivers that no longer flow, and humans built villages, created art, and buried their dead with care. The Sahara, as we know it, is only a phase, a temporary face of a land that has transformed many times before and will transform again. Its legacy is not silence but change, not absence but memory. The first part of that legacy is environmental. The Sahara teaches us that landscapes are not fixed but dynamic. The forces that turned it from savanna to desert were not sudden catastrophes, but slow rhythms of Earth's orbit, cycles of tilt and wobble that altered the monsoon and shifted the rains. These cycles continue today, and in tens of thousands of years the Sahara will likely bloom again. This knowledge transforms how we see deserts. They are not eternal wastelands, but chapters in a planetary story, oscillating between abundance and barrenness, life and silence. The Sahara's legacy is a reminder of Earth's deep time, of cycles far larger than human history. The second part of its legacy is ecological. The fossils buried beneath its sands reveal ecosystems that once flourished here, swamps filled with giant crocodiles, plains roamed by dinosaurs, savannas alive with lions and giraffes. Each fossil is a testimony to a world that has vanished, preserved by the desert's dryness. These fossils tell us not only what lived here but also what was lost. They show us that biodiversity is fragile, that ecosystems can collapse, that abundance is not guaranteed. They remind us that extinction is part of Earth's history and that survival requires adaptation. The Sahara's legacy is therefore a warning. Even the richest ecosystems can die. Even the greatest abundance can vanish. The third part of its legacy is human. Beneath the Sahara's sands lie the cemeteries of forgotten peoples, the villages of vanished cultures, the art of dreamers who painted animals long extinct. These peoples lived fully in the green Sahara, adapting to its rivers, herding its cattle, celebrating its abundance. When the desert came, they did not disappear. They migrated, adapted, transformed. Some became nomads, others settled along the Nile, others moved into the Sahel. Their traditions, technologies, and stories flowed into new civilizations. Ancient Egypt, with its monuments and myths, may owe part of its foundation to the exiles of the Sahara. The desert's death became the seed of new worlds. Its legacy is resilience, the capacity of humans to endure by changing. The art carved into its cliffs and painted on its caves is perhaps the most haunting legacy of all. Thousands of images show elephants, giraffes, cattle, hunters, dancers, and swimmers. They are memories preserved in stone, echoes of a green world swallowed by sand. They tell us that humans long ago celebrated life, recorded abundance, and mourned loss in the same ways we do today. The round-head figures, enigmatic and otherworldly, remind us that imagination and spirituality are as old as survival. The rock art of the Sahara is more than evidence, it is voice, a direct connection across millennia to people who saw their world change and tried to preserve it in pigment and line. The Sahara's legacy also lies in myth. Its transformation from fertile land to barren desert may echo in stories of lost paradises, drowned worlds, and vanished cities. Some have sought to tie its circular formations to Atlantis or its lost rivers to Eden. While science rejects these myths as literal truth, it recognizes the deeper reality that humans remember change in stories. The drying of the Sahara was one of the greatest transformations in human experience, and such events do not vanish from memory. They become legends, woven into culture, shaping how future generations imagine the past. In this sense, the Sahara is not only a desert but a source of myth, a reminder that history and imagination are intertwined. What remains beneath the Sahara matters not only for science but for humanity's sense of itself. Each fossil and artifact expands the timeline of life, showing us that we are part of a much larger story. Each buried aquifer reminds us that abundance can hide beneath apparent emptiness, and that water is the most precious of treasures. Each cemetery tells us that people lived here as fully human as we are, loving, grieving, and creating. The Sahara forces us to see beyond the surface, to recognize that even in silence there is memory. Even in emptiness, there is fullness. Today, the Sahara's legacy is still unfolding. Scientists continue to discover fossils of new species, tools of forgotten peoples, and evidence of rivers that once flowed beneath the sand. Satellites reveal ancient channels invisible from the ground, while ground-penetrating radar finds traces of buried settlements. Every year brings new revelations, new pages in the book of the Sahara's past. The desert is vast, and we have only begun to read its history. Its legacy is not finished, it is still being written. The Sahara also challenges us to think about our own future. As the world faces rapid climate change driven not by orbital cycles but by human actions, the Sahara's story becomes urgent. It shows us how ecosystems collapse, how abundance can vanish, how humans must adapt. It reminds us that migration is part of survival, that cultures are shaped by climate as much as by invention. It warns us that deserts can grow, that abundance is fragile, that the rhythms of Earth do not bend to human will. The Sahara's legacy is both inspiration and caution, both wonder and warning. And yet, beyond all this, the Sahara's greatest legacy may be perspective. To stand on a dune and imagine elephants where now there is sand, to picture crocodiles where now there is dryness, to see in the mind's eye rivers where now there are valleys of stone. This is to realize that the world we see is only temporary. Our cities, our landscapes, our civilizations are fleeting compared to the cycles of Earth. The Sahara tells us that change is inevitable, that nothing lasts forever, but also that life endures, adapts, and remembers. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was not barren sand. It was alive. Beneath its dunes lie the remains of rivers, cities, and civilizations. The bones of crocodiles larger than buses, the paintings of dreamers who remembered animals long vanished, the water of lakes that will not return for tens of thousands of years. Its legacy is not silence but memory, not absence but presence, not death but transformation. The Sahara is not empty. It is full of stories, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to remind us that deserts too were once seas of life.